This video is for people who would like to learn all about music theory. Music theory is essential to writing quality musical pieces. I learned about music theory from my piano teacher and have studied several classical pieces. You may pause the video and study a particular topic at any time if you would like. So what is music theory? Music theory is the study of the arrangement and form of different types of music. In each piece of music, there's a form and a chord arrangement. I promise this won't be one of those boring PowerPoint lectures. If you only get one thing out of this video, it should be chords. A chord is a series of notes based off of a scale. For instance, the C major chord is C, E, and G, with corresponding scale steps of 1, 3, and 5. Sometimes a chord may include a double note. Most often, it is the first note in the scale. In this case, the C can be doubled. For the purpose of these next topics, the doubled C will be left out. There is also a minor key. A minor key is the major key with lowered third, sixth, and seventh steps. When we compare C major to C minor, we see that the third step, E, the sixth step, A, and the seventh step, B, are all lowered. Again, the red arrows in the picture below show the minor chord in C. Each note in a scale has a function within the scale. A scale step can also be called a scale degree. The first step is the tonic, the second step, supertonic, etc. The Roman numerals to the right of the scale degree names also indicate the scale degree. These are used more in analyzing chords, though. For example, here is a simple chord progression with the chord labels. The note names at the top indicate the chord name, and the labels underneath the staff indicate the degree of the chord. C is the first step in the C scale, F is the fourth, and G is the fifth. You will learn later why the last chord in this picture is a repeated C chord. The next step in learning music theory is inversions. An inversion is the rearrangement of a chord from root position into a first or second inversion, and sometimes a third inversion. When a chord is in root position, the root, or tonic, is the lowest note played. A first inversion is when the top note of the chord becomes the bottom note. A second inversion is when the top note of the first inversion becomes the bottom note. Let's see a visual comparison between the root position of a chord and its first inversion. On the left is the F major chord in its root position. On the right is the F major chord in its second inversion. Notice how the C on the left is an octave higher than the one on the right. Doing the same thing, we will look at the first inversion with the G major chord. The root position is on the left, and the first inversion is on the right. Again, notice the Ds that are an octave apart. I bet you've been wondering what the numbers next to the Roman numerals are for. The Roman numerals are used in music analysis. These numbers indicate the inversion type. The top number indicates the distance between the top note and the bottom note. The bottom number indicates the distance between the middle note and the bottom note. For example, looking at the F major second inversion chord, The interval between the A and C is a sixth, and the interval between the F and the C is a fourth. The inversion numbers you see here are the abbreviated versions. The non-abbreviated versions are below the image. There are some types of chords that requires a third inversion. A dominant 7 chord is made of the scale degrees 1 tonic, 3 mediant, 5 dominant, and a lowered 7 subtonic. Its resolution is C major. The word dominant indicates that the chord is major. Listen to this soundtrack of a G dominant 7 chord resolving into a C major chord, second inversion. Dominant 7 chords always resolve into the chord that is a fourth above it. A resolution is when a chord, or set of chords, progresses from dissonance to consonance. Dissonance, in this case, is a chord that sounds like it needs to move somewhere. Consonance, in this case, is the sound of a stable chord. Dissonance does not always have to sound bad. For example, many people think that in certain contexts, a half-step interval sounds bad. To make things clearer, let's take a look at stable and active notes. A stable note is most often a note that is part of the major chord in any given key. For example, in the key of C major, the C, E, and G are all stable notes. If we change the E to an F, the chord sounds dissonant. It sounds as if it needs to go somewhere. Notice how there are 4 red note names and 4 blue note names. The arrows indicate where each note resolves to most often. So if we have a chord with C, F, and G, which is called a C suspended 4 chord, but we will get into suspensions later, it would naturally resolve to C major. If we lower the 7th step of C major, we get B flat. The C dominant 7 chord contains C, E, G, and B flat. Since the B flat is a half step above A, it resolves to an A. Whenever a dominant 7 chord is played, the 3rd, 5th, and lowered 7th steps resolve to an F and A. Listen to this audio of a C dominant 7 chord and an F major chord second inversion. When a dominant 7 chord of the tonic is played, the tonal center changes to the subdominant, or the 4th step, of the previous key. The tonal center is the chord that is made of all stable notes, which is the tonic of the key. If a dominant 7 chord of the dominant is played, G dominant 7 in C major, there is no change in tonal center since the tonic is the resolution. Here is a visual representation of the dominant 7 chord resolving into its resolution. Notice how the top 3 notes combine to make 2 notes. Looking at the red lines, we see that the E and B flat resolve in, while the G resolves up and down. Back to inversions. Now that you know how the dominant 7 chord works, let's look at its inversions. We know a chord with 3 notes has 2 inversions, so that means a chord with 4 notes has 3 inversions. Shown from left to right are the root position, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd inversions of a C dominant 7 chord. In a 3rd inversion, the subtonic, or lowered 7th step, is below all the other notes. The number of the inversion indicates the number of notes above the highest note of the chord in root position. For example, in the first inversion, there is one note above the B flat. In the second inversion, there are 2 notes above the B flat. The third, there are 3 above. Here are some other chords that use a third inversion. A major 7 chord consists of the scale degrees 1, 3, 5, and 7. A minor major 7 chord is not a contradiction. The minor indicates the chord is a minor chord. The major indicates that the 7th step is not lowered. The minor 7 chord is a minor chord with a lowered 7th step. Here are some more types of chords that are used in music. We will learn about these next. Another type of chord that requires resolving is a suspension. The abbreviation used when notating a suspension is sus. There are 2 types of suspensions, sus4 and sus2. The number indicates which direction the chord is suspended in. All suspensions alter the mediant or third step of any chord. For example, a C suspended 4 chord is made of C, F, and G. The third step becomes the 4th step. The same goes for the suspended 2 chord. In C major, the notes are C, D, and G. The picture on the top is a C sus4 chord, and the picture on the bottom is the C sus2 chord. Listen to this audio of a C sus4, C major, and C sus2, and C major chords. When notating music using music theory, there is an abbreviation used to signify a suspended 4 chord, which is 4/3, or just said 4/3. There is not an equivalent abbreviation for sus2, so just sus2 is used. The next type of chord is the augmented chord. The abbreviation used when notating an augmented chord is the plus sign. An augmented chord is made of the scale degrees 1, 3, and raised 5. The C augmented chord is made of the notes C, E, and G sharp. The visual representation of an augmented chord is shown on the right. Here is what an augmented chord sounds like. Another chord that acts in a similar manner to the augmented chord is the diminished chord. The 2 abbreviations used when notating a diminished chord are a superscript small circle and a superscript small circle with a line through it. There are 2 types of diminished chords, half diminished and fully diminished. A half diminished chord is made of the scale degrees 1, 3, and lowered 5. The corresponding notes in a C half diminished chord would be C, E, and G flat. A fully diminished chord is made of the scale degrees 1, lowered 3, and lowered 5. The corresponding notes in a C diminished chord would be C, E flat, and G flat. The visual representation is shown on the right. Here is what a C half and fully diminished chord sounds like. Another type of chord is the added note chord. In these chords, any note that is not in the original chord can be added. For example, we can take a G7 chord and add a raised fifth step. This chord is called a G7 sharp 5 chord. If you are adding a note that is based off of a note in the original chord, the add is not said when naming the chord. You can also add a note that is not based off a note in the original chord. If we take a G major chord and add a ninth step, we get a chord with G, B, D, and A. The A in this chord is a fifth above the D. Listen to the audio of a G7 sharp 5 chord and a G add 9 chord. Borrowed chords are another type of chord found in music. A borrowed chord is a chord whose tonic is not in the key being played. In this music, the D flat chord is a borrowed chord since the tonic of D flat is not in the key of C. The notation for a borrowed chord is a flat or sharp sign before the Roman numeral. For a D flat chord in C, the notation is a flat second step since the chord is a flat chord and the second step is the closest step in the key of C. If this were a D flat minor chord, the Roman numerals would be lowercase, indicating the quality of the chord as minor. That brings us to music analysis. The easiest way to understand how the basic structure of music works is to analyze different pieces of music. When you analyze music, you follow this format. Usually the chord name is placed beside the Roman numerals, but it can also be placed on top. The key signature tells you which chord the tonic is, in this case, D major. From there, you identify each chord based on the general structure of the music. Let's look at, for example, a snippet of Canon in D by Johann Pachelbel. We see in the first two beats a D, F sharp, and A. That means that the chord corresponding to the first two beats is D major. You don't have to use different colors, I'm just using them to distinguish different parts of the analyzing process. The key signature indicates that D major is the tonic, and since the order of the notes is D, F sharp, A, that means that this chord is in root position. When a chord is in root position, the Roman numeral only is written, since the 5-3 is understood. The next chord is A major, which is the dominant and is in the first inversion. In the beginning of the next measure is B minor, indicated by the lowercase letter and Roman numeral. It is the relative minor, so it is the submediant sixth step and is not inverted. I have found that the best way to explain cadences is to use an online resource. This source is from Teoria.com. Here's a web address to the site that I got the following information from if you would like to check it out yourself. The definition of a cadence is a sequence of notes or chords comprising the close of a musical phrase. A chord progression that goes from the dominant to the tonic is a perfect, authentic cadence. A chord progression that goes from the dominant to an inversion of the tonic is called the imperfect authentic cadence. chord progression that goes from an inversion of the tonic to the dominant is called a half cadence. A chord progression that goes from the dominant to either the relative minor or the subdominant is called a deceptive cadence. A chord progression that goes from the tonic to the subdominant to the tonic is called the Plagal cadence. This progression is most often used in hymns. In minor keys, the most frequent type of cadence is the dominant to tonic cadence. Looking at the scale degrees and chords in a minor key, the dominant chord is minor. However, most often, the dominant to tonic chord progression uses a major dominant chord. Here is an excerpt of Beethoven's Furies in A minor, in which the only chord structures in this snippet are a major dominant and minor tonic. If we go back over the chord structures, we see that the first chord is an A minor chord, which is the minor tonic. The next is a major E major chord, which is the dominant, and which is followed by the A minor chord again. Then E major, then A minor. The best way to explain what a modulation is to use Bach's Invention No. 8. The piece starts out in F major, modulates to C major, and then modulates back to F major. A modulation is the change of tonality in a piece and prepares your ear for the next tonality. The tonality is the character of a phrase of music in relation to the piece. The difference between a modulation and key change is that there is a chord in common in both tonalities that is used to get from one tonality to the other. This chord is called the pivot chord and is the dominant chord in the key. The character of the tonality of C compared to the key of F is that the B is natural. We see that up until measure 7, the tonality is F major with no accidentals. For the most part, Bach's works rarely have any accidentals outside of a modulation. Then, we see the B natural appearing frequently starting in measure 7, signaling a modulation. The chord in measure 7 is a double dominant chord, which is the dominant of the dominant in the key. G, for example, G is the dominant of C, which is the dominant of F. The double dominant chord is also the supertonic, second step chord, and is essential in every modulation. A modulation continues until the piece reaches a cadence in the new tonality of C major, which is when the tonic becomes C. When we analyze music, we use Roman numerals to indicate what a certain chord in a piece of music is. On the left are the scale degrees for each note in a scale. These Roman numerals are slightly different from the ones on the right which show whether a chord is major or minor in a certain key. For example, if we look at the key of C major, we have the following chords. The lowercase Roman numerals indicate minor chords, except in the case of B. The B diminished chord can be written as major and fully diminished, or minor and half diminished. Notice how the C major chord and the A minor chord have two notes in common. This is one way of identifying the relative minor chord, which will be covered next. The circle of fifths also helps us understand relative minor chord keys and chords. The relative minor key shares the same key signature as its relative major. For example, C major is A minor, C sharp minor is E major, and F minor is A flat major. The gold letters inside the circle are the minor chords / keys. There is also the parallel minor of any key. The parallel minor shares the same tonic. For example, C major to C minor, F major to F minor, etc. There are three keys shown at the bottom of the circle that have a sharp key and a flat key. D flat and C sharp are the same, G flat and F sharp are the same, and C flat and B are the same. C flat is not shown, but it is the same key as B and has 7 flats. Even though these three keys have a sharp key equivalent, the minor key is usually a flat key. In order to have a sharp minor, you must have a C double sharp, F double sharp, and a G double sharp. In D sharp minor, you have a C double sharp and F double sharp. In G sharp minor, you have a C double sharp. You might begin to see a pattern here. A has 3 sharps, D has 2, and G has 1. You can have an A sharp, D sharp, or G sharp minor chord, you just can't really have those keys. A double sharp and double flat are shown on the right. Double flats and double sharps lower or raise a note by a whole step. They are primarily used in keys with lots of sharps and flats. For example, the G flat minor scale is G flat, A flat, B double flat, C flat, D flat, E double flat, F flat, and G flat. Many times when a composer is writing in a minor key, they will use the leading tone for a 7th step instead of the subtonic. This is easiest to see in an A minor scale. Here, we have the A minor scale, but if we raise the 7th step to the leading tone, we get the harmonic minor scale. The harmonic minor scale uses the leading tone instead of the subtonic. Here are listed the 3 types of minor chords with the major chord comparison at the top. The natural minor has the lowered 3rd, 6th, and 7th steps. The harmonic minor has lowered 3rd and 6th steps. And the melodic minor is different going up and coming down. Going up the melodic minor scale, the 3rd step is the only step lowered. Coming down the melodic minor scale, we have the natural minor scale.